Hello everyone. Today in the subject of biosafety and biosecurity, we are going to study about the functions of Cpcsea, that is also known as the Committee for the Purpose of Control and Supervision of Experiments on Animals. The main objective of this lecture is to make you understand the purpose of uh, control and supervision of experiments on animals, and outcome will be that you will be able to understand what are the functionalities of this committees and what are the regulations and rules of this committee that is employed for the safety and security of animals. So the committee for the purpose of control and supervision of experiments on animals. So this is a statutory committee of Department of Animal Husbandry and Dairying, DAHD, Ministry of Fisheries, Animal Husbandry and Dairying, MOFAHMD, constituted under the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, Pca Act 1960. So CPCSEA is a duty bound to take all such measures as may be necessary to ensure that animals are not subjected to unnecessary pain or suffering before, during, or after the performance of experiments on them. For this purpose, committee formulated breeding of experiments on animals, control and supervision rules, 1998 amendment in 2001 and 2006 to regulate experiments on animals. Under the provisions of the above rules, establishments who are engaged in biomedical research, breeding and trading of laboratory animals are required to get themselves registered with CPCSEA. There are 19 members in the present Cpcsea, wherein Dr. O.P. Chaudhary, Joint Secretary of Animal Welfare, is the chairman of CPCSEA, and Dr. S.K. Dutt, Joint Commissioner, Animal Welfare, is the member secretary of CPCSEA. The objective. The objective of CPCSEA is to ensure that animals are not subjected to unnecessary pains or suffering before and during the performance of any sort of experiments on them. So earlier it was observed that animals were not being treated nicely and their cages were not at all secure. So all such careless things led to the formation of these bodies, and they are under the Ministry of Environment, and they make sure that all animals are treated in a very uh, humane manner, in a very careful manner, and they get each and everything that is required for the sustenance of a species. Right. For this purpose, under the delegated power, the committee formulated the breeding of and experiments on animals, control and supervision rules, 1998, which were amended in 2001 and then in 2006 to regulate the experimentations on animals. So this is a very active body, and it is always following the amendments also uh, in its rules from 1998 to 2006, with the increasing scenario of usage of animals in the process of experimentation. Okay, as the usage of animals is increasing day by day, so the rules are also changing day by day, and they are always there to make sure that animal is treated in a very humane manner, and animal is always taken care of, and they are not subjected to any sort of abuse or misuse when the experiment is over and when the experiment has been performed successfully. Institutional Animal Ethics Committee IAEC. This is an institution that regulates the ethical things on animals, and it look after that ethics are being followed strictly or not. It's a local body approved by Cpcsea, which has been empowered to permit experiments on small animals through an amendment in rules for breeding and experiments on animals, control and supervision in the year 2006. So IAEC, Institutional Animal Committee, what it is a local body of CPCSEA, because CPCSEA is somewhat a central authority, and it has uh, inoculated IAEC, Institutional Animal Ethics Committee, as a local body to help in the procedure for the regulation and for issuing the permission for the experimentation of on small animals, and ensure that breeding and experiments of on animals is done in a very significant manner, and none of the animal is abused or misused in the scenario. So, what is CP, SEA, and IAEC? The primary responsibility of a person who has been nominated to represent the committee for the purpose of control and supervision of experiments on animals. CPC SEA on an institutional animal ethics committee IAEC is the well-being and welfare of animals housed or kept for experiments, and their breeding is also done. So these two committees are made. Okay, CPC SEA is a committee that is much more centralized, and IAEC, Institutional Animal Ethics Committee, is somewhat a local body. So these two committees, they work in coordination and they work simultaneously to ensure that all the ethics are being properly followed. Okay, animals, they are always caring about the welfare of the animals who are involved in the experimentation procedures. Okay, and they are kept for breeding and experimental purposes. So they make sure that everything is okay with them. Okay, and they are not being misused or mishandled, because animals also have some rights, and they should not be abused. So, what is the role of IAEC, or Institutional Animal Ethics Committee? The primary duty of IAEC is to work for achievement of the objectives as mentioned above. IAEC will review and approve all types of research proposals involving small animal experimentation before the start of the study. So, readily you have to, whenever you are going to start some sort of experimentation in your institute or in your laboratory, you have to make sure that you have the permission of these bodies. Okay, if you don't have permission, if and you start uh, the experimentations on animals, it can be lethal for your organization, right? If you don't have the permission, then you will be subjected to some legal actions also. So functions. The main function of Cpcsea are registration of establishment, conducting animal experimentations or breeding of animals for this purpose. So you always have to register your establishment, and you have also have to make sure that you are registered and you follow the full documentation, uh, conducting animal experimentation or breeding of animals for this purpose, right? So these experimental animals are also bred in a very different way. Okay, they are not very aggressive, they don't jump here and there. So for that purpose only, for laboratory experimentation purpose, they are also bred in a very different manner. So whenever you are carrying out any sort of experimentation, any sort of breeding of such animals, then you have to take permission and you have to register yourself to CPCSEA. Selection and assignment of nominees for the Institutional Animal Ethics Committee of registered establishment. Okay, proper candidates, they should be assigned according to the standards and nominees of Institutional Animal Ethics Committee for the registered establishment. Approval of animal house facility on the basis of reports of inspection conducted by CPCSEA. So your animal house facility should be proper. Animals, they should be kept nicely, and the places where they are kept should be clean, and they should be properly provided food and water, and care should be taken about their health facilities and everything. And it should not be like that they are left untreated and nobody is taking care of them. So you cannot leave the animals unattended. And the facility that is running as animal house, it is not like that it is closed on Sundays or holidays. It is a 24/7 procedure, and it is always run, right? So an attendant is always present who is feeding the animals and always taking care of them. Permission for conducting experiments involving use of animals. So you cannot just go out in your laboratory and start conducting experiments on the animals. You need to have proper documentation, proper paperwork, and proper permission in order to involve animals in your experimentation procedures. Recommendation for import of animals for the use of experiments. So you also have to take the recommendation that we have to employ uh, this number of these number of animals for the experimentation procedures. So please grant us permission, and then only you can get some number of animals. And you also have to make sure what kind of experimentation you are going to perform on the animal, right? So you always need permission when it comes to importing animals also. Action against establishment in case of established violation of any legal norms stipulation. So if any norm is not being followed, the cancellation of permission can also take place. Right? If the animals are not treated nicely, animal house is not clean, or some sudden inspection takes place, and nobody is taking care of animals, then action against the establishment can really be a very serious condition. Conduct conduction of training programs for the nominees of CPCSEA. So every individual who is handling the animals should be properly trained. Okay, and he or she should know what to do and when to do. It should not be like that the individual is not at all aware of how to handle these things. Conduct support of conference workshop on animal ethics. When an individual is performing experimentations and all such working scenarios, he or she should, what they are trying to do is, each and every individual should be aware of these animal ethics aspect. When every individual is aware of these things, then only you can readily perform these things or experimentations in a very uh, controlled manner. Cpcsea Standard Operating Procedure or SOP for IAEC. So, what is the objective? The motto of Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, Pca Act 1960, as amended in 1982, is to prevent infliction of unnecessary pain or suffering on animals. So, the main objective of CPCSEA for IAEC is that in all the very portion, they have to look into the matter that no animal is suffering. Okay, no animal is suffering unnecessary pain and abuse, and the individual who is performing the scientific experimentation on them, he or she also cannot inflict all such pain on the animals. The central government has constituted a committee for the purpose of control and supervision of experimentation of experiments on animals. So this is a central government committee. Okay, CPCSEA. It is a part of central government as a committee formed by central government that look uh, into this procedure that laboratory animals are not at all subjected to any sort of cruelty, which is duty bound to take all such measures as may be necessary to ensure that animals are not subjected to unnecessary pain or suffering before, during, or after the performance of experiments on them. So, CPCSEA is a committee that has been appointed or that has been made by the permission of central government that ensures that every uh, animal, okay, is under the uh, strict observation, right? So the CPCSEA is a duty bound committee that has been appointed by central government that always look into the matter that every animal is not at all suffering under its supervision, and suffering with what? Suffering with unnecessary pain before the experimentation, during the experimentation, and even after the experimentation that were being performed on it. So they always have to make sure that all the legal norms are being fulfilled, everything is being followed properly, and these things are readily observed because these bodies they do conduct inspections also, and IAEC is very strict in these conditions. And the institutes that are not following the norms, they are also subjected to some legal actions. For this purpose, the government has made treating of and experiments on animals controlled and supervision rule 1998 as amended during 2001 and 2006 to regulate the experimentation on animals. So this rule on breeding of experiments on animals, it is being controlled and supervised according to that rule that has been amended during the year of 2001 and 2006 in order to control and regulate the experimentation procedures on animals. The objective of this SOP or standard operating procedure is to contribute to the effective functioning of the institutional animal ethics committee, right? So it just supports the functionality of the institutional animal ethics committee, IAEC, right? That very institution is following the SOPs, and all the animals are totally fine. No animal is diseased or malnourished, or they all have uh, good quality of cages. They are all healthy. So that a quality and consistent ethical review mechanism for research on animals is put in place for all proposals dealt by the committee as prescribed by Cpcsea under Pca Act 1960 and Breeding and Experimentation Rule 1998. So, the Pca Act, Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act 1960, that has been amended in 1982, that readily prevents the suffering on animals, and the breeding of experiments on animal rules 1998, that has been amended during 2001 and 2006. So these two laws, they are inspected under the committee of IAEC, okay, that functions under CPCSEA. So CPCSEA is a centralized authority, and uh, its local body is IAEC, okay, Institutional Animal Ethics Committee. So they both work to make sure that these two laws are being practiced, and their uh, conditions are being fulfilled. So any institute that is not following these laws, they are subjected to other things, and also some bans also. So IAEC has been designed to secure the following objectives. A. Experiments shall be performed in every case by or under the supervision of a person duly qualified in that behalf, that is, degree or diploma holder in veterinary science or medicine or laboratory science of university or an institution recognized by the government for the purpose and under the responsibility of the person performing the experiment. So every time they have to perform the experimentation under the supervision of some expert, okay, that is already having degree or diploma in veterinary science or medicine or laboratory animal science of a university or from a recognized institution, okay, that is having government permission. So uh, every time the care should be taken when the experimentation procedures are being done. It is the responsibility of the person who is performing the experiment. He or she should have the educational qualification, the hands-on experience that is required to work on that animal, and proper training alongside that. So then only that very particular person can work on these experiments, right? D. That the experiments are performed with due care and humanity, and that as far as for possible, experiments involving operations are performed under the influence of some anesthetic of sufficient power to prevent the animals feeling pain. So, what they are explaining or elaborating in the B part is that everything should be done on the basis of humanity. Okay, animals should not suffer unnecessary in every aspect, and experiments should be done under the proper scenario. All the surgeries or operations that are being performed on the animal, they should be subjected to proper anesthesia so that animals do not feel any sort of pain or unnecessary suffering. See that animals which in the course of experiments under the influence of anesthetics are so injured that their recovery would involve serious suffering are uh, ordinarily destroyed while still insensible. So, if you have performed such kind of surgery or operation where the recovery is very much painful and it will take a lot of time, then those animals, after the operation, while they are still insensible, they are destroyed. Okay, so that it does not cause them any sort of painful experience and inhumane treatment to the animal. So, IAC, it is always working in order to prevent any sort of suffering that is subjected to the animals, whether during the experimentation procedure or after the experimentation procedure. If the animals are subjected to any sort of painful treatment, they are before that only they are destroyed or sacrificed. See, the experiments on animals are avoided whether it is possible to do so, as for example, in medical schools, hospitals, colleges, and the likely if other teaching devices such as books, models, films, and the like may be equally suffice. So, all the measures should be taken in order to avoid the usage of animals. Okay. Uh, when animals can be replaced with the help of other teaching aids or devices like books, models, films, and other teaching aids. So, the reduction of animals in such experiments is very much important. So, if it is possible to do, then it is done. P. That experiments has larger animals and are avoided. It is when it is possible to achieve the same result by experiments upon small, small animals like guinea pigs, rabbits, mice, rats, etc. So, most importantly, what they are trying to explain that the usage of large animals is readily avoided as far as it can be avoided. Okay, most of the experimentation in the laboratory is carried out on guinea pigs, rabbits, and mice, etc. Because they are easy to deal. Okay, they can be sacrificed easily. They can be handled easily. If they are also subjected to any painful effect, they can be sacrificed also easily. So they are much more easier to handle, and they can be managed properly in comparison to larger animals. Ah, uh, that as far as possible, experiments are not performed merely for the purpose of acquiring manual skill. Right? Experiments they should all only be performed for the purpose of research, not for the purpose of acquiring some manual skill. Okay, I'm good at this. Okay, I can do that. So you are just wasting the life of animal for just acquiring a manual skill. This is not permissible. That animals intended for the performance of experiments are properly looked after both before and after experiments. So, whenever you are performing some sort of experiments on the animal, and it is your duty to look after both and after animals and after experiments to ensure their proper recovery. H. The suitable records are maintained with respect to experiments performed on animals. So, your institution has to maintain the number of animals that have been sacrificed or the animals that have been issued to the individuals, what sort of experiments have been done on those animals, and what were the results, and when those animals were sacrificed, how many animals recovered from the experiments that were performed on them. So, functions of IAEC, as defined in Breeding of Experiments on Animals, Control and Supervision Rule 1998, Institutional Animal Ethics Committee means a body comprising of a group of persons recognized and registered by the committee for the purpose of control and supervision of experiments on animals performed in an establishment which is constituted and operated in accordance with the procedure specified for the purpose of the committee. So, this committee looks after all the necessary details that are essentially required when the establishments are being concerned. The primary duty of IAEC is to work for the achievement of objectives as mentioned above. IAEC will review and approve all types of research proposals involving small animals experimentations before the start of the study. So IAEC is a local body that is always looking into the matter of the subject, all types of research proposals on small animals and other things. For experimentation on large animals, in case required to be forwarded to Cpcsea in a prescribed manner with the recommendation of IAEC. So, what we are looking in here, or what we are seeing here, is that when it comes to the experimentation procedures that needs to be carried on small animals, you can get permission easily. But when the large animals are involved, then CPCSEA comes into the action. Okay, then they will look into your matter, and it should your matter should also have the recommendation of IAEC, the local body. Then this central body would deal you or look into the matter. And most importantly, what they are trying to explain that if experiments can be done on small animals, but then why you need to go on to the large animals? Okay, you should always perform the experimentation procedures on laboratory animals. IAEC is required to monitor the research throughout the study and after completion of study through periodic reports and visit to animal house and laboratory where experiments are conducted. The committee has to ensure compliance with all regulatory experiments, applicable rules, guidelines, and laws. So this committee follows everything according to the scenario. Okay, when you have to take permission, okay, you have to fulfill these conditions, then you will get the permission. When you want to work on large animals, this is the criteria, these are the things that need to be fulfilled. Okay, you are following this procedure, then we will recommend you to the CPCSEA, that is a central government committee. So, composition of IAEC, Institutional Animal Ethics Committee, shall include 8 members as follows: a biological scientist, 2 scientists from different biological disciplines, a, a veterinarian involved in the care of animal, scientist in charge of animal facility for the establishment concerned, a scientist from outside the institute, a non-scientific socially aware member, and a nominee of Cpcsea 3. Three specialists may be co-opted while reviewing special project using hazardous agent such as radioactive substance and deadly microorganisms that are very highly contagious and pathogenic in nature. So this is the design of the committee that usually inspects and readily look into the matter of concern. The chairperson of committee and member secretary would be nominated by the institution from amongst the 8 members. Members against serial number 5, 6, and 7 will be nominated by Cpcsea with the provision of a link nominee for Cpcsea nominee. The use of animals in scientific research has been an area of concern in India, given the sharp polarization of views between animal welfare uh, activists and the scientific community of the country regarding use of animals. So, most importantly, the animal welfare activists have been polarized in the current scenario, and the scientific community of the country, they have some other things. So, to maintain the situation and to balance out the views, these committees they come into the action, and they put a lot of rules and regulations so that no one can put on the objection that these committees or the scientific community is abusing and using the animals. This led to proliferation of litigation, which impeded the pace of research. So, such type of proliferation of litigations and such issues and problems have readily discarded the pace of research and readily created a lot of obstacles in the pace of research. So it is very harmful for the scientific research of our country, that how the things are being operated, how the things are being carried out, and how the things are being done. In order to eliminate the potential for conflict, it was considered necessary to examine the international norms regarding the use of animals in scientific experiments. So, what we have done in our country, we have taken the international norms that are included with the experimentation, or scientific experimentation on the animals, and upgraded those regulations and streamlined and simplified the procedures so that they can be readily understood and they can be readily implemented in a very simple language while ensuring ethical use of animals. Okay, so the use of animals should be according to the ethics, and reducing infliction of pain and stress on animals during the experimentations. Okay, so what they are trying to ensure that uh, there should be no suffering of animal. In any case, there should be no stress on the animals during the procedure of experimentation, before the procedure of experimentation, and also after the procedure of experimentation has been completed. So earlier, when these things were not there, and it has caused a lot of obstacles for the pace of scientific research in our country. So, as for a solution, our country adopted the international norms and regulations and rules, and somewhat upgraded them and somewhat simplified those procedures in a very uh, easy language, and uh, proceeded towards the implementation in every concern. Aim. The aim of these guidelines is to ensure humane and ethical treatment of animals while facilitating legitimate scientific research involving experiments on animals. So, not only these guidelines are strict on the mistreatment of animals, but they also support and they also facilitate the research that involves um, experimentations on the animals. So, they also have to look into the matter that these regulations do not impede the scientific progress overall. Statutory provisions regarding the scientific experiments on animals. Persons engaged in conducting scientific experiment on animals must act in conformity with the provisions of Prevention of Cruelty to Animal Act 1960 and the breeding of uh, and experiments on animals control and supervision rules 1998 is as amended. So these all things are readily observed, and these two rules are always implemented whenever a person is conducting the scientific experimentations. And significantly, with the passage of time, these rules have been also amended with the passage of time in order to include many other things. These provisions are enforced by independent committee for the purpose of control and supervision of experimentations on animals, Cpcsea, a statutory body under the safety measures. Other legal provisions regarding animal experimentations are compliance is required with Cpcsea guidelines for laboratory animal facility. So, what are the guidelines? What are the things that have been mentioned by CPC SEA guidelines? Animals are being properly kept, they are fed properly, their health is good, they are nicely looked after. Okay, their food is good, their shelter is good, they are not suffering from any disease or any sort of any pain or any discomfort. Principles for scientific experiments on animals, relevant changes in rules and guidelines for specific situations involved by the consultative groups group accepted by CPCSEA. So these things they are readily observed and they are readily seen by the consultative groups that have been accepted by CPCSEA, that everything is being followed up nicely and everything is being observed according to the rules and regulations and the guidelines that have been that have been set up by the CPCSEA. Ethical principles adopted by CPCSEA for use of animals in scientific experiments. So, Principle 1, experiments on animals, including experiments involving operations on animals, may be carried out for the purpose of advancement by new discovery of physiological knowledge or uh, of knowledge which is expected to be useful for saving or prolonging human life or alleviating suffering or for significant gains in the well-being for the people of the country or for combating any disease, whether of human being, animals or plants. So these experiments are done for in order to see that how it can be beneficial for the human life. Okay, how it can be beneficial in prevention and cure of some sort of uh, disease in our country. Okay, or it is there for ensuring the well-being of some people and elevating or removing the suffering, or whether it is done for combating the disease of animal and plants and finding out some sort of easy solution. Principle 2, animals lowest on the phylogenetic scale, that is with the least degree of uh, sentience, uh, which may give scientifically valid results should be used for experimental procedure. Experiments should be designed with minimum number of animals to give statistically valid results at 95% levels of confidence. Alternatives not involving animal testing should be given due to full consideration and sound jurisdiction justification provided. If alternative when available are not used. So it should be done whenever it is necessary, not all the time. Principle 3: proper use of animals in experiments and avoiding or minimizing, whenever it is possible, of pain and suffering inflicted on experimental animals should be an issue of priority for research personnel, and unless the contrary is scientifically established, investigators should process on the basis that procedures that cause pain or suffering in human beings will also cause similar pain or suffering in animals. All scientific procedures adopted with animals that may cause more than momentary or slight pain and or suffering should be performed with appropriate sedation, analgesia, and anesthesia. So all the experiments should be made sure that animal is sedated properly. Okay, and he it should not feel any sort of pain. Principle 4: persons engaged in animal experimentation have a moral responsibility for the welfare of animals after their use in experiments. Investigators are responsible for the aftercare and or rehabilitation of animals after experimentation and may be permitted to euthanize. So, animal only in the following situations: when the animal is paralyzed and is not able to perform its natural functions, it becomes incapable of independent locomotion and can no longer perceive the environment in an uh, intelligible manner. During the course of experimental procedure, the animal has been left with a severe recurring pain, and the animal exhibits obvious signs of long-term extreme pain and suffering. In situations where no termination of animals experimented upon would be life-threatening to human beings or other animals, cost of aftercare and or rehabilitation of animals post experimentation are to be part of research cost and should be scaled per animals positive correlation with the level of sustenance of the animals. Principle 5: the living condition of animals should be appropriate for their species and contribute to their health and comfort. The housing, feeding, and care of all animals used for biomedical purposes must be directed by a veterinarian or other scientist in a relevant discipline who is trained and experienced in the proper care, handling, and the use of species being maintained and studied. In all circumstances, veterinary care shall be provided as necessary. So, Cpcsea guidelines on specific aspects regarding the use of animals in scientific experiments need to avoid minimize pain and suffering inflicted on experimental animals. Proper use of animals in experiments and avoid or minimization when avoidance is not possible. of pain and suffering inflicted on experimental animals should be an issue of priority for research personnel, unless the contrary is scientifically established. Investigators should proceed on the basis that procedures that cause pain or suffering in human beings will also cause similar pain or suffering in animals. All scientific procedures adopted with animals that may cause more than momentary or slight pain and or suffering should be performed with appropriate sedation, analgesia, and anesthesia. Need to avoid minimize pain and suffering inflicted on experimental animals. Proper use of animals in experiments and avoidance or minimization of pain and suffering inflicted on experimental animals should be an issue of priority for research personnel. And unless the contrary is scientifically established, investigators should proceed on the basis that procedure that cause pain or suffering in human beings will also cause similar pain and suffering in animals. All scientific procedures adopted with animals that may cause more than a momentary or slight pain and or suffering should be performed with appropriate sedation, analgesia, and or anesthesia. Proper care and handling and use of experimental animals. The living conditions of animals should be appropriate for their species and contribute to their health and comfort. The housing, feeding, and care of all animals should be used for biomedical purposes must be directed by a veterinarian scientist in a relevant discipline who is trained and experienced. Agriculture production research. The conventional regulatory framework may not be applied regarding use of experimental animals in agriculture production research. The practitioners would be responsible for self-regulation based on operational guidelines to be framed by Cpcsea. Powers of the Institutional Animal Ethics Committee (IAEC). IAEC is not empowered to clear research projects proposals that involve experiments on animals higher on phylogenetic scale than rodents. So IAEC cannot go further ahead than rodents in permitting permission for the research project proposals. Inspection of animal house facility. Both announced and unannounced visits by duly authorized personnel only to inspect the animal house facility of institutes may be carried out. However, the personnel undertaking inspection may not order either temporarily or permanent closure of the animal house facility or suspension of registration of animal facilities uh, or impose any other penalty but must report the findings to the Cpcsea for further action. Procedures for approval of scientific experiments on animals. Definition of experiment in term of Rule 2 of breeding of and experiments on animals. Rules 1998 as amended. Experiments means any program or project involving use of animals for the acquisition of knowledge of a biological, physiological, ethological, physical, or chemical nature, and includes the use of animal or animals in the production of reagents and products such as antigens and antibodies, routine diagnostics, testing activity, and establishment of transgenic stocks. For this purpose of saving or prolonging life or alleviating suffering or significant gains in the well-being of people of the country, or for combating any disease, whether of human beings, animals, or plants. Experimental animals which are subjected to regulations, the relative sentience of different species of animals are as follows: invertebrates, birds, rodents, felines, bovines, primates, more evolved primates like chimpanzees. Anything higher than vertebrates in terms of levels of sentience requires regulations. Thus, farm animals are also subjected to such regulations. So, functions of Cpcsea. All establishments engaged in research and education involving animals are required to comply with the various guidelines, norms, and stipulations set out by Cpcsea. The main functions of Cpcsea are registration of establishments conducting animal experimentations or breeding of animals for this purpose, selection and appointment of nominees in the institutional animal ethics committees of registered establishment, approval of animal house facilities on the basis of reports of inspection conducted by Cpcsea, permission for conducting experiments involving use of animals, recommendations for import of animals for the use in experiments, actions against establishment in case of violation of any legal norm or stipulation. Functions of Institutional Animal Ethics Committee IAEC. Every establishment constituted and operated in accordance with the 16 procedures specified by Cpcsea and is required to constitute an institutional animal ethics committee. Registrations of establishment in this rule 3 of breeding of experiments on animals control and supervision rule 1998 as amended, no establishment shall carry on the business of breeding of animals or trade of animals for the purpose of experiments unless it is registered. In terms of rule 4 of breeding of and experiments on animals control and supervision rule 1998 as amended, no establishment shall perform any experiments on animals unless it is registered with Cpcsea. Every such establishment shall stop performing experiments on animals or breeding of animals for the use in experiments if registration is refused to it by Cpcsea. So these are the references from where we have collected the content, and thank you very much for listening to this lecture.